So this is just going to be a quick spin over my life, basically. I've had a slightly, it's not unconventional. I mean, there are lots of other people that do this. I've never worked for a big company. I've always either worked for a startup or I've started my own company. So this is a kind of spin over kind of things that might happen. So I just press space. Is that a safer thing to do? Yeah. Right. Early days, 1980. I just realised not only were none of you born in 1980, but probably some of your parents weren't born in 1980, which makes me feel really old. Back then, the first ever computer I used was a teletype connected to the mainframe in Cornwall Council, and you had to type, literally, and you had a paper tape feed. I was very good at repairing paper tape with bits of sellotape, so I'm that old. My first ever computer at home was a Commodore PET with a tape drive, which you loaded stuff from. And then I got onto the BBC Micro, which was the best computer ever built. And I was more into making stuff, electronics, than I was programming at the time. So I basically soldered to things that I shouldn't solder onto in my computers and made robots and flashy things and all sorts of stuff. This is a picture of me back then when I was about 13. I won a prize for something I wrote at school. I can't remember what it was now. My year off, I don't know how many of you have taken year offs, but I certainly think it's a good idea. I worked on, this is a 380Z, which was a kind of single micro that used to get in schools. And I worked on teaching Logo to school kids, which is about, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's full turtles. You can make them drive around and do pretty patterns. And I still like Logo as a teaching language. I still actually, when we do school things, I like to talk about it. And I start to get into networking. I learnt Pascal. The previous slide was about BASIC and assembler. I've always done quite low-level languages. I've never done any big stuff. University, this is me sporting a very unwise beard. Some people can rock beards, I'm not one of them. There was one of the biggest mainframes in any university at the time, and of course I made it do really important things like draw Mandelbrot sets. I also had one of the first ever RISC-OS machines, which was an ARM-based processor. Now, all that's died, but every single one of your mobile phones has an ARM processor in it. And that whole technology came from originally the education market in Cambridge. And I read lots of books. I don't know whether you still read books at university more, because it's all online, but this is before the internet existed by a long way. Read a lot is my advice. Read as much as you can. Read stuff that you don't have to read. And then play with and making things. There's going to be a whole theme all the way through this talk, is just playing with stuff. I started writing proper code in BCPL, which none of you will have heard of, and then I started in C, and I became a bit of a specialist in ARM assembler, which fed into a whole lot of stuff that's on the next slide. After university, I stayed in Cambridge for a while, and I worked on all sorts of interesting projects. I was a contractor. I also was one of the founders of a small consultancy. And where I did things like I worked on the animatronics for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie, which we got an Oscar for, the technical Oscar. That was fun. That was based on an ARM processor board. I also started working on lasers, laser projection systems, which I'll come back to. And I wrote code for laser controllers that we used in big concerts in Covent Garden and a few other things like that. I worked on the Atari Jaguar games console. I can't remember what that is for. What's that picture represent? Can't remember. Large-scale format printers. I worked on the Inmarsat email system. What is that? Oh yeah, financial trading systems. I did some work on trading screens and stuff like that. It was all based around the concept of single board controllers with ARM chips on. That was what I specialised in. And actually, looking back, there was this theme around all this. It was about data flow machines, which are a bit like ways of connecting components up to process data that flows through the system. And that's kind of a bit of a theme all the way through my career. And I'm just starting to realise that actually that's something I still want to do. So I'll come back to that as well. Then I got into big stuff. I got involved I was the CTO of a venture capital funded business back in the dot-com boom days, and we did video on demand systems. for some big companies like Telewest, which is now Virgin Media, and BT, and all sorts of people like that. I worked in Hong Kong, I worked in New York, I worked in London, and then I moved back to Truro. So it's a bit like Only Fools and Horses, I should put that on the side of the van. And that went on for quite a long time. We built everything. We built our own networks, we built our own set-top boxes, we built our own user interface, built our own video streaming systems, and that's all had knock-on effects. During this time I moved from C to C++. I used to write in a very Objective C metaphor, and then I realised that actually C++ was that anyway. Why didn't I just use C++? So I started using C++, and I still did a bit of ARM assembler until I realised that the compiler was better at writing assembler than I was, so I stopped doing that. And then everything stopped. .com crash, telco crash. I guess most of you guys were probably about 2 at that point, so you won't remember it. But anyway, basically the industry stopped. And the company that I helped to found went out of business, and I was here in Cornwall, and it was a bit of a, oh, now what happens? So part of the point of this is, not everybody's career is a meteoric rise. Sometimes you can get bumps in the road, pretty major bumps in this case, because it was, game over basically. So I got involved with online gaming. I wrote some systems for network traffic control in online gaming, and I got involved in a local company that was doing internet systems for hotels, and that kind of led on to other things. But it was a bit of a, there was a couple of years in the wilderness. This was before there was there was software companies here in Cornwall, but not very many. So it was a bump in the road, like I say. So 2005 I started PacketShip, which some of you would have come up to see today. We do interactive TV systems for hotels and cruise ships and hospitals and prisons. Well, our software is deployed in 60 countries around the world, but all based on this office, so because we sell through a channel all the time. There's some little bits of our user interface along the bottom. We work, all the kind of heavy lifting stuff is done in C++, the video streaming, the back office stuff. JavaScript, everything is pure JavaScript, so all TVs and all set-top boxes now support JavaScript, which is great, because we can write one application that runs across everything, and all mobile devices, of course. And then we've got PHP and Linux and stuff to glue it all together again. We're a purely Linux-based company, and somebody asked me why, and there's a long story behind that, but anyway. So this is, you saw some of the process earlier, the kind of thing that we do. We're always developing that process. I wouldn't say that what we do is perfect. I think I was honest with you about things that were blockages in our system and what we need to do about that. And now I'm back into the good thing now is that I've got the team that are a brilliant set of guys who are developing. I don't have to develop very much anymore. So I'm now thinking about the next stage. That's my job, is to think about the next stage. I have a new business we've just started called Greenway Laser, which does laser shows. Going back to all that time before that was 30 years ago I did it. This is currently just a kind of, we just produce laser shows. We're not writing software yet. We're using commercial software, but there's definitely an aim to do that, to go back into that market and to develop software for that. And then this whole thing about data flow comes back. And I don't know whether you probably haven't even heard of this term yet or dealt with it. It's the idea of having composable elements, simple elements that you connect together, either with bits of wire or logically in. And this, if you've ever played with an analog synthesizer, that's how it works. It's lots of things you join together. If you look at video, this is video projection. It's the same thing. If you look at data analysis, I have a little website called Wood for Trees, which does climate data analysis, and that's the same thing. So it's all the same area, and that's where I'm starting to think. So quick take-home message is your career won't be a single path. You probably won't always work for the same company. You may not, like me, ever work for someone else. You always work for other people. The key thing is play with stuff. always learn the latest stuff that's out there. Right now, I'm teaching myself React in JavaScript. I've been programming JavaScript for as long as it's existed. I now realise that I'm way behind the curve, so I need to learn. So I'm learning React and Redux and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, keep playing, keep trying stuff, and have fun with things, really. That's it.
Huge round of applause.